Welcome back to the Mainstream. John, how are you going today?
I'm not too bad, Dan, but you were just telling me there's all these reasons for optimism.
Well,
why are you so happy?
I'm up and about. And I've got 3 reasons why I'm up and about today, John.
What are they?
3 reasons. Number 1, the most important, is that the Crows beat Port by over 90 points over the weekend. And Big Tex, who's my favourite player, got 3 goals.
What's number 2?
Number 2, I bought a Ford Ranger, second hand, finally found one. So we've got that one locked away.
When you're talking to someone who's bought a Ford Ranger, do you ask them what colour it is?
You can ask what colour.
Or do you just assume they're all black?
I've got the white one. I've gone plain white with the canopy, so there's plenty of room to get all the kids' stuff in the back. So
and your campaign posters
and
for when you run
posters
next
and
time,
flutes and everything else that you can cram into the back of the ute there. So
and number 3, what's the third reason why you're so happy up and about?
Well, number 3 is that, as we predicted from day one, the coalition is closer than ever before to dumping net zero. I was in Canberra, as you know, earlier in the week, and I can tell you that the coalition will dump net zero this year.
But so you've put football ahead of the national interest?
I have. Well, you got to hold on to something, John. You got to hold on to something.
Well, I'm holding on to the fact that common sense and science and economic realism will win out, and net zero is going to go. Tell us about Canberra.
Well, I was in Canberra earlier this week, and as we talked about last time, Barnaby Joyce has a private member's bill to abolish net zero. So we were there to disseminate our research, talk to policymakers, politicians about why we need to get rid of net zero.
And you had some big research on
we had a lot of research.
Does,
yeah. So let's talk about that research. So the research we had, John, was on the job costs of net zero. So it won't come as any surprise to learn that the jobs that are on the chopping block are agriculture, manufacturing, mining,
the backbone of the country.
The industries that we don't really need. Yeah. So
where mainstream Australians work.
That's right. But what was really interesting about our research, and what has never been done before, is we broke down the job losses by federal electorate. And we have the top 20 electorates that have the most jobs at risk, and the bottom 20 electorates with the fewest jobs at risk.
Where do the teal seats rank?
Well, the teal seats, John, might surprise you to learn, are in the bottom.
No.
So the coalition holds 1 seat in the bottom 20 with the fewest jobs at risk. That's the seat of Moncrief, and there's only about 1.5% of jobs at risk from net zero. Now, if you look at the top 20, 16 seats are held by the coalition. Now, the second one there of interest is Maranoa, and you've also got Farrer.
So Maranoa is David Littleproud's
seat.
Yep.
Farrer is Susan Lay's seat. So in Maranoa, over 20% of jobs in Maranoa are at risk, and in Farrer, it's about 13% of jobs are at risk from the policy of net zero. So not only is net zero bad, as we talked about economically, bad for regions, bad for our society, bad for energy security, it's also bad politically for the coalition.
So when you walked the corridors of Parliament and you went into the gallery and you gave this to The Guardian, what did they say?
Well, we didn't quite give it to The Guardian. They weren't that keen on running that, John.
But you did get a run. Tell us about the media you got.
Well, the media was good. So the Daily Telegraph were very good. Front page of the Daily Telegraph. It got out there and it got out and about. And look, I think the point is just that sometimes the things that have the biggest impact are the things that are the most obvious. I mean, sometimes you just have to say what is actually happening and what is actually going on.
What was the feeling in Canberra as a whole?
The feeling in Canberra is really interesting. I mean, you know this from your days working in politics, which is, yes, Canberra is detached from the rest of society, but you do get a feel for what's going on there. And now that Labor dominate, the Greens are dominating the Senate, you've got all the left-wing journalists that are up and about, you can just feel the power of the left, which is now at a high point, at least in the numbers, not necessarily in the community, but in the numbers. And there's a real sense of arrogance that's there.
And you can see, looking at it, that arrogance doesn't like to be punctured by the reality of net zero. So rather than having a debate about net zero and saying why a commitment to net zero is good for the country, you've got the media, you have the hangers-on saying we can't even debate net zero. The coalition can't risk electoral oblivion by abandoning net zero, as if it could get worse for them than it is.
Well, but isn't it? But see, what is so frustrating about that argument is they have had net zero for 2 elections in a row.
How's that gone for
them?
And
they smashed it both, and they lost the very seats that we were told that they were going to win because of net zero. The only seat they now hold is Goldstein. The only Teal seat, which they won back, that was the only one they won back. And Tim Wilson didn't have vote for me for net zero on his placards. So it is a vote. We've made this point time and time again. Net zero is a vote loser, not a vote winner.
And it's interesting. So you've got do you want to actually talk about Barnaby's private members bill?
Yes.
And then we'll talk. We'll need a new segment, the Media Watch segment.
The Media Watch segment. It's fascinating though. Having been in Canberra, so we were there. Barnaby, we had Matt Canavan, Garth Hamilton were there for the press conference to announce the private members bill going into Parliament. And there's several components to his bill, but basically you have the bill, you put it into Parliament. Now, and then you give a speech to introduce it, and he explains why he's done this. So we were there for all of that, providing our research to him to help build the case. And what's interesting is that it's up to the government as to whether or not they want to call a vote on the bill. Now, most of the time, there is no vote on a private member's bill. Now, I thought they would call a vote because that would force the Liberals and the Nationals to vote on Barnaby's bill to repeal net zero. Now, I'm surprised the government, as we're speaking now, the government has not called a vote on that bill, because what would happen is there'd be a division, which means that everybody has to sit, the yeses on one side, the noes on the other side, and there'll be a visible challenge to Susan Lee's leadership. But that hasn't happened yet, but I think it might happen soon.
And how do you think it's going to end up?
I think the Nationals will support repealing the bill if they have to vote on it, and the Liberals will be in chaos. If it were to happen now.
Well,
then, they don't have a position.
And it's interesting. So you see the moderate Liberals, the left-wing Liberals, and this is now our Media Watch segment, briefing journalists. So last week we had Phil Curry in the Australian Financial Review. Today there was Paul Kelly in the Australian. And it was interesting for me looking at it how they were expressing the arguments of the moderate Liberals. So, for example, in the Phil Curry piece, he quotes, of course, an unnamed Liberal who says, nothing materially will change by abandoning net zero now because the coalition is not in government, which to me is just a symbol and a admission of defeat. It doesn't recognise that you have to form a contest, you have to have a debate, and it just demonstrates that the Liberals can't see through the prism of anything else other than being in government, which they're not going to be in for some years. They're not committed to encouraging a debate. So, that was interesting from Phil Curry. And then today, Paul Kelly, and he name checks the IPA as leading the debate against net zero, gives the arguments, again, from a Liberal perspective, that net zero is popular, that net zero will lead to electoral oblivion of the Liberals if it's abandoned, and that this is just a fool's errand. So if it's so popular, why are the Liberals contemplating potentially dumping net zero?
Well, which part of it is popular, did he say?
No, he said it's popular.
Is it the higher electricity prices? Is it the loss of manufacturing? Is it the destruction of agricultural land?
No,
is it the taxes on cars?
No, we've had Liberals say that Australians voted for net zero because they resoundingly re-elected Anthony Albanese.
Yeah. Well, I could tell you as a candidate, there was nothing about net zero in Labor's campaign material. Nothing at all. I was on the booths the whole time. I was on there quite often with my Labor opponent. He never once mentioned net zero. He never once said, vote for me as your local member because you'll get net zero. I know that net zero is a vote loser. That's why they don't talk about it. Now, I've seen all these pollsters come out and say, net zero is popular. It is not popular. And the reason you know it's not popular is you can tell by what is on the campaign material of a political party. That is what they judge to be popular and unpopular. And I think, did I tell my story about Albanese being on the billboard on the Thursday before the election? I can't remember if I told that.
I don't think so.
But this demonstrates my point. So you might say, well, Dan, how do you know that? Aren't you just biased because of net zero? Well, no, because early in the campaign, there was none of Labor's material had Anthony Albanese's face or name on it anywhere. Now, in South Australia, Peter Malinaskis was all over it.
Because he was running for Parliament,
He was running for federal Parliament, apparently, in Boothby.
Well, he soon will be.
Well, that is a very important topic we should turn to, because he will be going to Canberra at some point. That I can guarantee you. But Albo was nowhere. And then I would always drive past every single day, going into campaign, I'd drive past this billboard and it would always have one of the major, like Medicare or free TAFE or 20% off HEX, whatever the main messages were.
All those government giveaways.
All the giveaways, but they were popular. That's what their focus groups were telling them to put on the billboards. Then on the Thursday before the Saturday, I was driving in and I see Anthony Albanese's face. It's just him building Australia's future, vote Labor.
You knew you were stuffed.
It was stuffed. So my point being that if it is popular, they will put it on there. And net zero is not popular.
How much will Australians pay for net zero, Dan?
Well, the most they'll pay, John, I think only 92%.
This was a poll the IPA
This was a poll we did a little while ago. We asked how much are you personally willing to pay for Australia to meet its net zero target. So the point of this question is people will support net zero if they think it has no cost. Because of course you would. Why wouldn't you support it as no cost? So we asked how much are you personally willing to pay? Have a guess, John. What is the percentage that are willing to pay $500 or more per year?
Well,
you reckon it'd be...
It would be at least 50% if we're told it's popular and Australians are willing to make the sacrifices to achieve the impossible.
A little bit lower. Dial it down.
40.
40, no, go
30.
Down.
20.
Down. This is like the...
Hang on, but there's
game
20
show.
Yeah, but okay, let's say the green vote is 12%.
Yeah.
So at least 12% of Australians would pay $500 or more.
Take the one off before the two.
What are you telling me green voters are hypocrites?
That's exactly what I'm telling you, John. That's what the data's telling us.
What's the number?
2%. 2%. So 48% said nothing. I'm not paying 1 cent for net zero. 48%. That's up from 42% when we did this poll in 2022. 26% said $50 a year, 19% $100 a year, and 5% $500 per year, and then 2% more than $500.
Right, it's funny how no one ever talks about it.
No one ever talks about it. And the other point I just want to make from our poll, so this was a poll that we commissioned of Dynatar, and they did this in 25 to 28 April this year of 1,027 Australians of a nationally representative sample. And we asked what should be the main focus of the energy policy. Affordability,
keeping the United Nations happy.
That's right. Well, the good thing
Australia's international standing and our reputation should be the focus of our energy policy.
We didn't poll that one this time.
You didn't want to go there?
We'll do that next time. We'll come back to about eating vegetables once a year, which is one more time than I eat them already anyway, so that's okay with me. Only 21% said we need to meet our net zero target. 1 in 5. So this argument that it's popular is bogus. I know that as a candidate. We know it from the polling. It's just ridiculous.
Well, and then what amuses me is we have Liberals saying, well, net zero is popular. Well, as you've demonstrated, it's not popular. But B, if they're going to follow seemingly popular policies, then why don't they talk about restricting immigration? Which is a popular policy.
Very popular.
Why don't they talk about getting rid of welcome to country, which is ceremonies, which is a popular policy? It's funny how popular policies are picked and chosen according to the political predilection of the person saying it.
And the Australian flag.
And yeah, exactly. If we're going to talk about what's popular, let's have all politicians standing behind the one flag that unites us.
And you've been doing some research
on
the energy costs.
Well, indeed. So I have been doing some research because a lot of people have spoken to me, why isn't there just some discussion about if renewable energy is so cheap and if it's the cheapest form of energy, why are Australian power prices going through the roof? And again, in the absence of a debate, and if you have the two major parties supporting a policy, there's not going to be a contest of ideas. And it took me 5 minutes of Googling, which was Google research, not AI research, to find a really interesting document from the company Compare the Market by Lachlan Moore from March this year, and it's a analysis of the electricity prices in about 20 countries going back to 1980. And the point that's often been made, which is Australia once had the cheapest electricity in the world and now has amongst the most expensive electricity in the world, is absolutely true. But when you compare it, for example, to the United States in 1980, 1980, Australia had electricity prices which were 20% cheaper than the United States and which were less than half the rate in Japan. Australia, when we were making things, when we had a car industry, when we had a fertiliser industry, when we were adding value to things that we make, Australia had cheap electricity. Now, Australia has electricity prices which are more than 40% higher than of the United States and which are 10 to 20% higher than in Japan. So let's compare Australia to Japan. We went from prices that were less than half to now much more. This is crazy stuff, and our politicians are not speaking to this. And as I said...
Well, they're complaining about Trump's tariffs.
Well, exactly, and Adam Crichton's made the point that what we're doing with our net zero policies are worse than Trump's tariffs.
Way more expensive.
So I'm thinking I might send this article. I don't know whether the Liberal Party review of net zero is taking submissions from the public, but I am a Liberal Party member. So I might just send them this article, Changes in Electricity Prices Globally, Lachlan Moore, March 25, 2025.
Well, if you're sending them something, you should also tell them what's happening in Victoria.
What's happening? You've had a busy few days. I saw a photo of you at Parliament House this morning.
We're at Parliament House.
What were you doing at Parliament House?
We were there with hundreds of farmers who have come to Melbourne, to Spring Street, to protest against new laws that are likely to come in Victoria in relation to net zero. And I was there to participate there and talk about the IPA's research. And so this is from our colleague Mia Schlicht, who's done a lot of great work on what's happening in Victoria. And I just want to explain a couple of things here, because one of the points about net zero, we talk a lot about the cost. It's unpopular. It's ignoring the opinions of mainstream Australians. But also, because it is unachievable, it requires ever-increasing levels of extremism by governments to try to get there. So it's taxing cars, the kind of food you can eat. We've been through this before.
Monitoring our spending via bank accounts.
Exactly. And so this is what's happening in Victoria. This isn't that cab off the rank. This is the National Electricity Amendment Vic Grid Stage 2 reform, which implies there'll be Stage 3 and 4 and 5 and so on. And basically what this allows is for the government to compulsorily acquire access to farmland to put up transmission towers. So government officials can walk on farmland and just put up these transmission towers. And I just want to read out a couple of things here that Mia's done. And I know this is getting a little bit in the weeds of it.
But the point of this is Victoria is Australia's
petri dish.
If this is happening in Victoria, it'll happen everywhere else.
And this is what, if you ever want to get close to net zero, this is the kind of stuff you need to do. And don't forget, the Victorian government themselves had a report that said 70% of Victoria's landmass would need to be taken up by renewables infrastructure.
And then I remember when this was raised and they said, I think it was a spokesperson who said, no, that's not true, that's not true. Then they buried the link. And
you can't find it now. If you try to find it, you cannot. If you Google it, you can't get it. You have to use a Wayback Machine. They're still accessible. But, so in terms of this bill, what it does is it creates a new person, an authorised officer, which is a term you'll remember from COVID, where neighbours could spy on each other and dob them into government. So an authorised officer could be empowered to enter onto private land without owner or occupier consent. Section 93BJ allows that to take place, and Section BG and BM prohibits, this is the key thing, it prohibits owners and occupiers of the land who are subject to an entry order. So the government said, you can go onto that land to put on a transmission line and you're the owner. And it says here, under these two sections, you cannot obstruct, hinder or delay the entry of that authorised person.
And delay can be interpreted in any way.
But you're not allowed to do that.
Wants.
And it also means that you need to facilitate, if you're not facilitating it. So say
that's the dangerous part. So if you don't open the gate for them.
Yeah. So you might say, I've got a dirt road and it's been raining for a week. But if you haven't helped them come on, you're still liable under this. And what happens is you get fined $12,000 if you don't let them on. That's what's happening in Victoria. And like you say,
that's
this
the
is
face
exactly,
of net zero.
Yeah, it's $12,210.60. The offence attracts a maximum of 60 penalty units and $12,200.60.
So inner city teals are imposing this upon the rest of Australia, on the regions, on rural areas, and they have very little regard for any other Australians.
Yeah, although as a number of the farmers said, they're not getting on their land. So he said, that, I'm not going to quote the particular person who said it, but he gave a speech and he said the gate's locked, you're not coming in. So we'll wait and see what happens there. But this is not good. So the other thing I wanted to talk about, John, based on my experience in Canberra, is one of the things you get to do is you talk to journalists. I have a love-hate relationship with journalists, but some of them are smart and thinking. And I had a chat with Paul Sackle, who's at the SMH and the Age, and we had a interesting chat about the Senate dynamics, because obviously the Senate, Labor and the Greens have the numbers, so they can pass. Labor can do whatever it wants if the Greens agree to it. But what he identified is that you've kind of got this de facto UK reform style block that's developing in the Senate, where you have some, more of the outspoken Liberals, like Senator Antic, Senator Canavan. You've got One Nation, who now have 4 senators. You've got Senator Babbitt, who we affectionately call the Babbinator. And there'll be others who come in and out of that block. So there's sort of this block that's developed in the Senate, which I thought was a really interesting way of thinking about how those dynamics...
And what's the influence of that going to be?
Well, it's already dragging it. I mean, this is what happens when you have private members' bills or motions that are put forward, is it forces a vote, and it shows that there's a different opinion and perspective in Parliament.
And I think that was the significance of the Nationals coming out first against The Voice back in 2022. It created a debate, and the media had to cover that debate, and it also allowed Australians to know that there was going to be a discussion. And the point, again, as we've been talking about, that net zero is popular. Well, The Voice was popular until it wasn't. The Voice was popular until we and others and our friends at Advance and Jacinta Price and Warren Mundine explained the consequences of The Voice.
Yeah. And ETS. I mean, you were very involved in the ETS as Executive Director of the IPA. The emissions trading scheme, which was sort of the precursor to a carbon tax, they're both basically the same thing. That was popular. And Abbott was unpopular when he opposed it to start with.
And the wonderful economics correspondent of The Australian at the time, a great man, Alan Wood, who's sadly no longer with us, was right about so many things. And I remember a column, it would have been maybe 06, 07, something like that. He said, look, the ETS is a certainty. We will have an ETS, and there's no way Australia is not going to have an emissions trading scheme. And Alan Wood was right about so many things, but fortunately, he was wrong about that because there was a debate. And Tony Abbott took the lead,
and we won it.
Speaking
of columns, you had a really interesting column in the Australian Financial Review recently, where you discussed some really interesting research from our friends at the Centre for Independent Studies, and they had a report showing the increased independency of Australians in receipt of income from governments.
Well, I did, yes. So our friends at the CIS, as you mentioned, had a report by Robert Carling, a former New South Wales Treasury official, Leviathan on the Rampage. And what a great title. All true, sadly. And I wrote my column on it, and there were a couple of things that I think were really significant. And Robert pointed out, and this got a lot of publicity, and I think it should get even more attention because it's got so many consequences. More than half of voters now rely on government for most of their income through public sector wages, welfare benefits or subsidies. And as I say, and as Robert says in his report, the consequences for democracy are enormous. And in Robert's words, government may have grown to the point that there is now a large segment of the population, perhaps even a majority, facing incentives to vote for a living rather than to work for a living. And this is how Australia is changing. And to come back to the idea of the Liberal Party simply supporting what's popular, well, I think we have to face up, and we've talked about this, that right at the minute in Australia, big government, big debt, big brother is popular, because there's not an alternative being presented, and the consequences aren't yet being felt by the Australian people of these sorts of policies.
And you identified something else in your article about, which is related to this, which is one of the consequences of having this massive government, is you've got a shrunken civil society, fewer small business, and a bigger, more big business taking up a share
Well,
of the economy.
and then I referred to some work coming out from Morgan Begg and Kian Hussey and the team here from the IPA. And the analysis that they've identified is that, of course, as government gets larger, as you say, it crowds out the private sector. So we all tend to talk about Australia as a land of family businesses, self-employed, even though government has a large role in society. And we all hark back to the time of Menzies, and so many people talk about Menzies' comments about his famous Forgotten People speech, where he talks about lifters, not leaners. And it's interesting, when Kian and the team went back in 1960, the share of national income received by family businesses and the self-employed was 26%. So a strong, viable family business and self-employed sector. So it was 26% in 1960. Have a guess, Dan. So now we can do the opposite. I'll be the game show host. So if it was 26% in 1960, what is the share of national income to family businesses and the self-employed now?
Ooh, it's probably halved, I'd say.
Lower.
Maybe 15,
Less.
12.
7%.
7% from
26%.
26.
As government has grown, this is what happens. This is what's happened. And of course, if we're talking about net zero and its implementation is the perfect opportunity for government to grow.
And where's the money gone?
It's gone to government.
And big business, isn't it?
And big business.
going up as well.
And they've also done numbers on what they're calling the financialisation of Australia. It's gone from 1 or 2% of national income to financial services in the finance sector in, again, the 60s and early 70s. And it's now at something like 6 or 7%. Yeah. So that's an increase of many multiples, because now that we're not making anything in Australia, all that we have to do is shuffle our superannuation around.
Super and housing.
And housing.
We're over-financialised as a country.
Yeah, exactly.
And
how are young people... Well, and now that leads on to something that you've been thinking about in relation to Japan. How are young people responding to this around the world?
Well, I think what's interesting... So I just wanted to talk just briefly about a recent election in Japan. And there was a really interesting article in the New York Times, which has become much less aggressively left-wing since Trump won the second time, because they now have to accept...
You mean since he won the third time? Sorry.
And so basically what happened is we've had this rise of alternatives. They call them far right in the article, obviously, but these are just mainstream centre-right parties that performed very well at the election. And I was just reading about the reasons why this has happened. I'll just read this part out. They say that, well, they call them new nationalist parties, which is a derogatory term. But the reason that they're performing well is unrestrained immigration, and also this perceived anti-male bias in the political system and in society that's stopping young men from getting ahead, because they feel like the system is rigged against them. If they go to the gym, it's toxic. If they want to have self-improvement, start their own business, they're being put upon by the elites in society. And this surprise, if you keep talking down to people and you keep excluding them from institutions and a way forward, there will be a backlash.
Well, it's significant because we tend to think of this as an English-speaking phenomena.
Yes.
But this is Japan.
That's a good point. It's Japan. So it's happening everywhere, and the undercurrents are here in Australia as well. I mean, I very clearly saw it as a candidate that many young men feel disenfranchised and being excluded from society.
But we were talking about this the other day with the UK now lowering the voting age to 16. I displayed some scepticism that this was a good thing for democracy or for the world, but you had a different view.
I think it's probably a bad thing overall, but if Labor in the UK think it's going to be good for them, they've got another thing coming, because the 16 to 18-year-old men will vote for Farage, and the 16 to 18-year-old women will vote Greens, or in the UK context, Lib Dems or Scottish National Party. They're not going to vote Labor, and they're not going to vote Tory. Now, Australia is different, because if they were to try to do that here, most 16 to 18-year-old women would vote Green, So Adam Bank will still have his seat.
And preferences will come through to Labor.
And preferences, so Labor will not want to do it for that reason. But I don't know where the mail vote, it'll probably go to One Nation, or it will spatter around the
Babinator.
The Babinator, but it will not come to the Liberals. But Labor won't do it here for that reason, but also because it will help the Greens. The Greens would be the immediate primary beneficiary of a 16-year-old.
And Labor don't need to do it, so they won't do it.
They won't do it.
And again, from our voice polling, we know that a majority of men under the age of 24 voted no. And a majority of women voted yes.
Yeah.
And the idea, while I think it's going to be dangerous for democracy, the idea that automatically lowering the voting age will be bad for Conservatives, I don't think is right. You know, and until Donald Trump blew up the Canadian election, Poilievre was going to win on the vote of young people.
Yes, yeah. So I think it's interesting. I don't think it'll be a good outcome, if nothing else, because of the education system. And this is the point that you've made. The education system, you've got 16-year-olds that have very warped views, not due to their own fault, but because of the education system in Australia, Australia is a bad country, and et cetera, et cetera. So that would be the main problem. But as we talked about last time, one of the antidotes to a bad education system is social media. And you, to my great surprise, said you'd only listen to one Joe Rogan podcast.
You said there was something like 5,000.
There's about 5,000, or I think there actually is literally 5,000. Maybe it's in the 500s. I don't know. There's a lot. And you've had some listener engagement telling you that you need to get onto it.
Yes, well, after we talked about that, I got an email from a avid listener and viewer of the podcast. Thank you, Andrew. And he said to me that Ken Burns, the American documentary filmmaker, had a fascinating discussion with Joe Rogan a couple of months ago. So that's going to be my tip for this podcast. It's going to be a recommendation that viewers and listeners spend 2 hours, 45 minutes watching or listening to Ken Burns talk to Joe Rogan. Ken, what for me was interesting is Ken Burns, left-leaning, no fan of Trump necessarily. He's certainly got an ideological perspective, but first and foremost, he's a historian, and he's a historian in the way that we don't get in Australia. He is still passionate about telling the national story of America, the good bits and the bad bits. So, of course, he's made documentaries on the Civil War, on the Americans in the Second World War. He's got a documentary coming out on the Revolutionary War. But he's also made programs about jazz, about sports, and it's a really interesting insight into how even someone from that ilk can still think that America is a good place, it has a story worth telling, that it's a story told through people. And it's also a fascinating insight into the life of a documentary maker, his care to detail, his attention to facts. And he had a lovely phrase, which I've now discovered now that I'm taking running a little bit more seriously in preparation for my visit to Berlin for the marathon in some 8 weeks now. And I've only discovered the meaningfulness of this in the last few months. Ken Burns talks about comparison is the thief of joy. So learn not to compare yourself to others, just learn to think about how you were yesterday and how you can be a bit better tomorrow.
I don't have anything as wise as that, but I want to tell you about something that you may not expect, which is I'm a fan of lower taxes, but I have found a tax that I like.
Oh, what? A tax on teal voters?
Oh, well, that's not a bad idea. I mean, you had the idea of double the dole and tax the teals.
Oh, yes. I think I was quoted in the media once saying that, yes. Well, I was joking, Dan. I was joking.
But I found
what's the tax you like?
A tax on electric vehicles. So there's a proposal that I was just reading about, which is because they don't pay the road, they don't pay fuel excise because they don't use fuel. So it's a question of, well, that's unfair because you have petrol vehicles that have to pay a tax and EVs that don't. So this was a proposal to tax EVs by essentially monitoring them about how much you drive. So every single month there'd be some kind of data that's provided and you've got to pay a tax based on how much that you've driven. Now, the reason I like this tax is I don't like electric vehicles and I don't really like the people who drive them.
So the IPA under 70 years of history comes out in higher taxes. But you mentioned something, you were talking about this before. What's all that information being collected by the companies that make these electric vehicles?
Well, this is one of the reasons. Okay, so it's like, why don't you like electric vehicles? And there's a few reasons, but one of them...
One is a matter of principle.
It's a matter, but it's about... It is... These days, these modern cars are basically a computer system with a engine in it, right? And so there's all this data. All these cars are imported, obviously. Many of them are imported from China, and they have all of this data that's being collected about you, and you could be... An external force can stop you from driving them. They can shut the system down externally. I feel very uncomfortable with that, and it's also an attack on independence. This is a point that I've made before, that a normal car or ute allows you to do things that you want to do. You can go out there and drive. You're not dependent upon anything else. But the EV is not just like, I'm driving an electric vehicle. It's a categorically different kind of machine.
We need to devote an entire episode to the war on motorists.
We do.
But it's an assault on choice, independence, on our movement, on our ability to do the things that we like. And the first politician who actually speaks about this is going to get a lot of support. And I was always a fan of Ricky Muir. I know he got 0.0001% to, fluke a spot into the Senate. He was the successful Victorian Senate candidate for motor enthusiasts.
Right. And how long was he there for? Did he do his
3 years because there was a double dissolution.
Right, okay.
But we need a political party for motorists.
We do.
No, who drive petrol-powered cars.
Petrol, diesel, yeah. Internal combustion engine. So what do you think is going to happen first? Are the Crows going to win the flag, or will the coalition dump net zero?
No, the Western Bulldogs will win the flag before the Adelaide Crows, and that will be our revenge for the 1997 preliminary final.
That was never a goal. John. It always missed.
Libba did kick that goal.
We'll take this up next time. Good to chat, John.